You might consider a Super Bowl ring the crowning achievement for any great quarterback, but some of those who have seen the confetti fall don't belong among the game's very elite. They're not Hall of Famers, some are barely NFL starters, and their resumes would be long forgotten had they not won the big game. Even some of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history have fallen short of the mark on multiple occasions, which is why it's so crazy to think that the following list of quarterbacks have one, or maybe even 2, Super Bowl rings. Here are the 5 worst quarterbacks to win the Super Bowl. Let's start with Jim Plunkett, the proud owner of 2 Super Bowl rings and a Super Bowl MVP award. Don't be critical just yet. I really like Jim Plunkett, and he deserves to be in Canton. But Plunkett wasn't really good prior to joining the Raiders. He was considered league-wide as a huge bust. Plunkett was the first overall pick in the 1971 draft by the New England Patriots as a Heisman Trophy-winning quarterback out of Stanford. He had all of the tools and accolades for an NFL franchise to believe he might be their future, but he wasn't that for the Patriots. He certainly had an interesting career, though. In his sophomore campaign, the team went 3-11 while Plunkett threw just 8 touchdowns and an alarming 25 interceptions. Granted, the garbage Patriots were not the team then that they eventually became in the early 2000s, but Plunkett's trajectory certainly didn't appear to have a couple of Super Bowls in the cards in his early years either. After eventually helping them to a 7-7 season in his 4th year, the first time in 8 seasons they avoided a losing record, his time in New England was cut short. He was traded to the San Francisco 49ers in 1976, who were enamored enough to give up a haul of picks, but this move only resulted in yet more frustrating losses and interceptions. By the time he was 30, his career looked all but over. Until Al Davis and the Raiders gave him his 3rd and most important chance in 1978. Although he was only signed to play a backup role for the team, he wouldn't start a game for them until the 1980 season when starting quarterback Dan Pastorini fractured his leg and Plunkett was called in to replace him. Ironically, he came in and threw 5 picks and the Raiders lost the game, and yet it was in that same season Plunkett would go on to win his first Super Bowl. The Raiders gave him the reins the rest of the season despite a pretty dismal start. They won 9 of their next 11 games and earned a spot in the playoffs as one of the wild-card teams. Thankfully for Plunkett, this was a legendary Raiders team with the great Lester Hayes, Ted Hendricks, Cedric Hardman, and Matt Millen leading the defense, and the legendary Cliff Branch and Dave Casper on offense. Ray Guy also punted his way into the Hall of Fame in that era. Jim Plunkett ran the offense with more efficiency than he ever had in his career previously, proving that a good offensive line and great receivers are crucial to quarterback success. It was the perfect fit for him, surrounding himself with some of the Raiders' best talent in franchise history. Despite being a wild-card playoff team, the Raiders won 4 straight, and just like that, Jim Plunkett would feature as a starting quarterback in the Super Bowl. The former number 1 pick played one of the best games of his career, too, going 13 of 21 for 3 touchdowns, including an 80-yard touchdown to Kenny King in the first quarter, which fired the Raiders out to a 14-point lead. They never relinquished the lead, and Plunkett was named the Super Bowl MVP in the win. Between the Super Bowl victory of the 1980 season and the time he did it again in 1983, Plunkett had been benched in favor of the Raiders' first-round selection, Mark Wilson. As fate would have it, at least for Plunkett, Wilson got hurt, and Plunkett helped guide the Raiders to another championship run. Starting 13 games in '83, the Raiders went 12-4, beating both the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Seattle Seahawks on their way to Super Bowl 18. Back in those days, the Super Bowl broadcast was notable for airing the iconic 1984 TV commercial introducing the Apple Macintosh to the world. But the real story of the game was Marcus Allen. The King of LA carried the ball 20 times for 191 yards and 2 touchdowns as the Raiders whooped the Washington Redskins 38-9. Jim Plunkett threw a touchdown, kept his cool, and won his 2nd Super Bowl ring. The real question is, how can a quarterback who won 2 Super Bowls not feature in the Hall of Fame? You think Plunkett belongs in Canton? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. Next up, we have the man responsible for the Philly Special, who, like Plunkett, was a savior when his team needed him most. Nick Foles spent the first 3 seasons of his career with the Philadelphia Eagles, drafted in the 3rd round of the 2012 draft out of Arizona. After a 1-5 record as a starter in his rookie season under Andy Reid, while throwing 6 touchdowns and 5 picks, Nick Foles took off in Season 2 under Chip Kelly. He initially had to settle for the backup role behind Michael Vick, but an injury handed the keys of the offense to Foles, and he never gave them back. He threw a stunning 27 touchdowns to just 2 interceptions, 1 touchdown shy of tying Tom Brady's record of 28-2 for the best touchdown-to-interception ratio in NFL history. His main partner in crime was Deshaun Jackson, who reached 1,300 yards and 9 touchdowns. Despite this success in early 2015, after spending just 3 seasons with the Eagles and taking them to the playoffs in his first year as the starter, Foles was part of a QB exchange trade with the St. Louis Rams. Philly traded him and 2 draft picks for Sam Bradford and a pick in return, ending his first stint with the franchise. Foles played poorly in the years he spent away from Philadelphia, with such a bad season in St. Louis almost ending in retirement. He felt he didn't have it anymore, washed up and out of luck within just 4 years in the National Football League, but then he returned to Philly. The Eagles had drafted Carson Wentz the year before, and Foles signed a 2-year contract to serve as his backup in early 2017. Wentz was playing at an MVP level that year, but a nasty collision as he reached for the goal line in Week 14 against the Rams ended his campaign with a torn ACL, forcing Nick Foles to take over an Eagles team headed for the playoffs in the 2017 season. Considering how good Carson Wentz had been, their season was feared to be over, but Nick Foles calmly entered the fray and steered the team to a final 13-3 record. In the playoffs, Foles helped the Eagles fly past the Atlanta Falcons before a meeting with the Minnesota Vikings in the NFC Championship game. With the #1 defense in the country, the Vikings were the favorites despite the road visit to Lincoln Financial Field. But Philly and Foles had other ideas, destroying them 38-7 in front of a home crowd with a lights-out performance from Foles himself. Now headed for the Super Bowl amidst a Cinderella story like no other, Nick Foles and the Eagles would have to take down none other than Tom Brady and the New England Patriots if they wanted to achieve their ultimate dream. With a Philly special and the team performance of a lifetime, they pulled it off. Foles caught the touchdown on one of the NFL's most iconic plays, and the Eagles won their very first Super Bowl in the modern era. Foles threw for 373 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, and was named the MVP of the game. He has since retired with one of the most unusual careers in NFL history. The one-season wonder back in 2013, and then a playoff run any Hall of Famer would be proud of in 2017, but that was largely all she wrote, making his Super Bowl ring one of the strangest the game has ever seen. Nick Foles' run taking over late in the season and shining in the playoffs is well documented, but Jeff Hostetler came in even later in a Super Bowl winning campaign back in 1990. He was a backup to Phil Simms in New York from the mid-'80s all the way through the '92 season during a phenomenal era for the Giants. Lawrence Taylor led a magnificent defense featuring multiple Pro Bowlers, including Eric Howard on the defensive line and fellow linebacker Pepper Johnson. In the 1990 season, Simms had guided the Giants to an 11-2 record for a Week 15 matchup with the Buffalo Bills. They were one of the league's best at the time and would be the team New York would eventually meet in the Super Bowl that season. During that Week 15 game, Simms broke his foot, ending his season with the playoffs right around the corner, forcing Hostetler into the game and the driving seat. He was an impressive scrambler, and the Giants leaned into that the rest of the way. In Week 17, the G-men rushed for a season-high 213 yards, partly thanks to Hostetler's 82 rushing yards on 10 carries. After easing past the Chicago Bears in the divisional round, the Giants squeaked out a low-scoring, tightly contested win against the back-to-back defending champion San Francisco 49ers. The game finished 15-13, with the Giants managing 5 field goals on the road to take down the Niners. That set up a Super Bowl meeting with the Buffalo Bills, who had the lead at halftime thanks to a safety on Hostetler forced by the legendary Bruce Smith. In the second half, the Giants held the football for record time with one of the longest drives in Super Bowl history. Eventually, it all came down to a potential game-winning kick from Buffalo's Scott Norwood. When Norwood pushed it wide right and missed, the game was over, and Hostetler finished up what Phil Simms had started to give the Giants their second Super Bowl in 5 seasons. While the Hoss did what he needed to do to give the Giants the best chance at winning it all, his only accolade as an NFL quarterback was a Pro Bowl appearance in 1993 while playing for the LA Raiders. Yet he has 2 Super Bowl rings. Hostetler certainly benefited from playing on a great team with an elite-level defense, but he's not the only quarterback that the Giants carried, and this may be the most controversial thrower to win it all on our list. Eli Manning. Be honest, If it weren't for the notoriety of the Manning name, would Eli have been given the lengthy career he had? Out of 16 seasons in the NFL, Eli got to play 14 of them as the full-time starter in New York. But take a look at his career stats. Look at how many interceptions the guy has thrown. In his first championship season, being led into the Super Bowl by an elite Giants defense in 2007, Eli threw 20 interceptions. In 2010, he threw 25 interceptions. In 2013, 27 interceptions. Every other year, you can count on Eli to throw interceptions in the teens. He was a double-digit pick machine. Sure, he won 2 Super Bowls, but come on. Eli didn't pull the Giants pulled Eli. There's no buts about it. But when it comes to the debate for the worst quarterback ever to win the Super Bowl, there can only be one. Trent Dilfer, the year 2000 with the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens team in that specific year had perhaps the best defense the NFL has ever seen. Defensive tackle Sam Adams, a veteran Rod Woodson who had seen it all by then, Chris McAllister and Dwayne Starks at corner, and of course, the legendary Ray Lewis. The offense was stacked with talent too. Jamal Lewis and Priest Holmes at running back, Hall of Fame tackle Jonathan Ogden on the blind side, and the newly acquired Shannon Sharpe, formerly of the Denver Broncos. The Ravens only conceded more than 14 points 4 times that season, including the playoffs and the Super Bowl. They just needed a game manager, and after benching Tony Banks early in the year, Dilfer would be the guy the rest of the way. He threw for 1,500 yards and 12 touchdowns during that season with 11 picks. The Ravens went 7-1 in games he started, including an impeccable postseason run to the big game. But when you hear of a defense carrying an offense, and more acutely, a quarterback, there is no greater example than the 2000 Baltimore Ravens. In the playoffs that year, they allowed 23 points in all 4 games combined, never more than 10 in a single game, and only 7 in the slaughter of the New York Giants in the Super Bowl. Dilfer had very little to do, simply needing to avoid making catastrophic mistakes and help first-team All-Pro kicker Matt Stover into field goal range. Unsurprisingly, despite the Ravens winning the Super Bowl, Dilfer wasn't retained at the end of the season. The rest of his career and the years before that season were remarkably uneventful, with a couple of 21 touchdown seasons in the late 90s in Tampa Bay proving the only alternative highlights. There will never be a greater example of a quarterback being carried to a Super Bowl ring than that of Trent Dilfer, the all-time worst quarterback ever to win it all. Imagine being one of the best quarterbacks like Dan Marino, Warren Moon, or Phillip Rivers and never winning the Super Bowl. But a guy like Dilfer has a ring. What a world we live in. So who else do you think deserves to be on this list? Let me know in the comments.